We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph Meseches Moed Kattan. This is Moed Kattan Daf 27a. The Bryce over here says, let's say a person is traveling and he finds out that he's an ovel, he finds out a relative has died. So if he's able on the travels, he's going for business. If he's able to minimize his business dealings, then he should do so. But if he's not able to, and then he can go along with the business with those he is together with, but he should not conduct business independently. Rashi over here says, he shouldn't do business independently, but together with the group that he is a part of, he can conduct business. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, from when do we overturn the beds? From when the corpse leaves the doorway of the house. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua says, Mishayistam Hagola, it's from when the coffin is sealed, when the gravesite is sealed, that's when we overturn the beds. Ma'isa Shemes Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, there was a story where Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken died, Kevan Sheyotzim Pesach Beso, when he left the door of his house, Amar Lahem Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer said to them, Kefu mitosechem, turn over your beds. V'chevan shenistam hagolal, and then when the grave was sealed, Amar Lashua Kefu mitosechem, then Rabbi Yoshua said to them, turn over your beds. Amrulo, they said to him, Kvar kafino al pizaken, we already overturned it, according to the instructions of the elder, meaning we already followed what Rabbi Eliezer told us to do when the mace left the house. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Me'imasai zokfen es hamitos be'erev Shabbos. At what point in time do they straighten out the beds? Do they turn them upright on Erev Shabbos? Because on Shabbos you're not supposed to have the beds overturned. Min ha-minchu l'mala, you do that from the time of Mincha on Friday and onward. That's when you stand up the beds. Amar Rabba Bar Huna says, Afa pichei, nevertheless, Eino yoshev oleh shetechshech. You can't actually sit on the beds until it actually becomes dark, meaning until Shabbos begins. Even though by Mincha time Friday, you're already turning the beds upright, you can't sit in them until Shabbos begins. Well, Motzai Shabbos, now Motzai Shabbos, even though there's only, let's say, one day of Shiva left, it's almost over, still Choser v'kofa. You have to go again, and you have to overturn the beds. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Hakofa mitaso lo mitaso bilvad hukofa, ela kol mitos sheyesh lo besoch beso hukofa. When a person overturns the beds because of Avelos, he doesn't only overturn his bed, he overturns all of the beds in the house. Even if he has 10 beds in 10 different places, kofes kulan, he has to overturn all of them. And even if there are 5 brothers, and let's say one of the brothers dies, so they all have to overturn the beds. Now let's say you have a bed, but it's not designated for sitting on or lying on. It's designated that you put utensils on. In Kalim, Ein Tzarech L'Chafos, you don't have to overturn such a bed. Dargish also, the Gemara will explain what that is exactly. Ein Tzarech L'Chafos Ela Zokfo, you don't have to overturn a dargish. You could just stand it upright. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Dargish matir es karvitov v'hu nofel me'olav. By a dargish, you can loosen the loops, and then it will fall on its own. And the Gemara continues, my dargish, what is a dargish? Amar Ula says, Arsa degada, it is a bed of mazel tov. Rashi over here says, Arsa degada mita shem yachdim osol mazel tov, vein mishtamshin b'klum. It's not a bed that you use for anything, it's just there for a good omen. Elam yachdim osol lishros, mazel tov aleh. It's just there, it's ornamental, again, in order to be for a good omen. That's what Ula understands dargish is. So Amar le Rabba, so Rabba says to him, to Ula, Elam me'ata, according to that, Gabe melech ditnan, by a king, we learned in the Mishnah as follows. The Mishnah says, Kol ha'am misubim ala aretz. It says everybody has to sit on the ground. This is talking about when they are in Avelos. V'hu meisav ala dargish, and he sits on the dargish. So could a dargish really mean this bed that's just there for ornamental purposes? Mi'ika midi, is there such a thing, diad ho'idna loos vine, that until now he didn't sit on it. Nobody used it for sitting. V'hashtam os vinale, now suddenly the king's going to sit on this. It doesn't make sense. So maskef lo Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi asked on that, my kushya, what's the big deal? What's the difficulty? Midi dahavi achilo shasi, it's no different than eating and drinking. We also change the customs for eating and drinking when we're not veilus. Until this point in time, nobody gave him food to eat and to drink. We didn't feed him a meal. But now there's a special su'uda that's made for the mourner. We're going to give him to eat and drink. That's a custom we haven't had until now. So it should be the same thing over here. There's nothing wrong with the king using the dargish. But the Gemara says if there is a difficulty on this understanding of dargish, the difficulty comes from the following. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, as we learned in a Bryce, and we said this above as well, dargish eino tzarech l'chafos ela zokfo. By a dargish, you don't need to overturn it, you could stand it upright. So v'i arsa degada, if it's just an ornamental bed, amay eino tzarech l'chafos, why don't you have to overturn it? Hatanya, but we learned in a Bryce, Hakofa mitaso lo mitaso bilvad hakofa kol mitas sheyesh lo b'soch beis hakofa. When he overturns his bed, he doesn't only overturn his bed, he has to overturn all the beds in the house. If you got to do all the beds, and the dargish is an ornamental bed, why not overturn that as well? But the Gemara says that's not a kasha. My kasha, what difficulty is that? It's no different than a bed that's designated for vessels. It's not designated for sitting on. The Tanyas we learned in a braysim. So we said before, if it's a bed that is designated for kalim, you don't need to overturn it. So the fact that you don't need to overturn a dargish would not indicate anything about the fact that it's not an ornamental bed. On the contrary, maybe it is an ornamental bed, since it's not used to sit on, therefore you don't need to overturn it. But the Gemara says, rather, if there is a difficulty with this explanation of dargish, the difficulty is as follows. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer, we said before that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, dargish matir karvita v'hu nofel me'elav, that by the dargish, you loosen the loops and then it falls on its own. Now, if you think this is an ornamental bed, my karvita nisle, so what loops exactly does an ornamental bed have? And the Gemara continues, Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, so one of the Rabbanan said to him, and this particular one of the Rabbanan, his name was Rav Tachlifa, he was from the west, and he was frequent in the marketplaces where they worked with leather. So he said to Ravin, my dargish, what is a dargish? Arso detzila, it means it's a bed that's made out of leather. And the Gemara says, Itmar Nami was taught as well. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, dargish seirugo mitocho. A dargish, what's unique about it is that the interlacing of the bed, it happens from the inside. And mita, when it comes to a regular bed, seiruga al gaba, so then the lacing is on top of it on the outer part, and that's why there's an idea by the dargish that you can just undo the loops. The loops over there are where you interlace it, so you can just untie the loops, and then it's going to fall on its own. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Barach, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yaakov Barach says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in this regard, meaning regarding a dargish, you're going to do exactly this. You loosen the loops, and it falls on its own. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here, the tzila, or again, we're talking about a dargish being a leather bed, seirugo mitocho, the interlacing is from the inside. Machnes ritzuos, you take these straps and you enter them, min chore atze hamita, from the holes that are in the wood of the bed. But when it comes to regular mito, it's al gaba, it's on top of it. V'ha'or kofel al ha'etz, the leather is doubled over onto the actual pieces of wood of the frame. So basically the construction of the bed is different, and that's why again Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says what he says regarding loosening the loops of the of this bed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baracho, Amar Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Yaakov Baracha says in the name of Rabbi Asi, mito shenaklita yotzin, if you have a bed where the poles are sticking out, zokfa v'dayo, you could stand it up, and that's going to be enough. Rashi over here explains, naklite means eitzim yotzin misukonin l'merashosav u'lemeraglosov. You have these pieces of wood, these poles that are coming out at the head of the bed and at the foot of the bed. V'nosin eitz aruch alei, and then you put a long piece of wood on top of them. V'nosin hasadin alem, then you put some curtains, you drape it over, lishmor mehazavuvim, in order to protect from the flies. So such a bed, it's going to be hard to overturn it, because you have this pole, this part of the frame, that's there for putting the canopy over it, so therefore it's enough to stand it up. No issue, you don't need to overturn such a bed. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Yoshen al gabe kisei al gabe udayni gedola. Let's say the person sleeps, the mourner sleeps on a chair, or he takes a mortar, and he turns it over, he sleeps on the mortar, or al gabe karka, or let's say he sleeps on top of the earth. The point is he's sleeping in an uncomfortable fashion, but lo yotzi yedei chova, so he does not fulfill the obligation. The obligation specifically is to overturn the bed and sleep on an overturned bed, not just to sleep in some other uncomfortable fashion. Rabbi Yochanan says, Shalokayim kfiyas hamita. The problem over here is he has not fulfilled the obligation of overturning the bed, like we just said. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Mechabdin u'marbitzin bebeis ha'avel. In the house of the avel, you're allowed to sweep and you're allowed to sprinkle water on the dirt floor. Umadichin ka'aros v'kosos u'tzlochios v'kitonios bebeis ha'avel. You're allowed to wash the dishes, the plates and the cups and the jugs, etc. You're allowed to wash those in the house of the avel. However, you're not allowed to bring the incense, and you're not allowed to bring the spices. You're not allowed to make it smell nice in the house of the Avil with these kinds of things. Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? But Bar Kapara taught, you're not allowed to make a bracha on the incense and the spices in the house of the Avil. It sounds like you can't make a bracha, but you're allowed to bring them into the house. And so the Gemara says, Lokash, it's not difficult. In one case, we're talking in the house of the actual mourner. There, you're not even supposed to bring it in. Ha beveis ha-menachmen. But if you're talking about in the house of those who are coming to console, they have their own houses, but those are the ones who come to console the mourner, so they're allowed to have the mugmar and the besamim in their houses. They just should not make the bracha. The Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ein molichin lebeis ha'eva, lo betavla, v'lo ba'askotela, v'lo bekanon. You're not allowed to bring food to the house of the mourner with a tray, or with a bowl, or the kanon is a special kind of basket. Ela besalim, you have to use regular, ordinary baskets. Ve'ein omrim birchas avelim b'moed, you're not allowed to say the birchas avelim achol moed. Aval omdin b'shuru menachmen u'pochenes harabim. Instead, you just stand in the row, and they console the mourner, and then he dismisses them, he lets them go after they console him. Ein manichin es hamita berchov. We don't leave the bed or the coffin in the middle of the street. Shelo lahargel es hahesped. We don't want to encourage eulogies. This is talking about chol hamoed. V'lo shel nashim liolam. Now, for women, we don't leave it in the street all the time. Not only chol hamoed, we never leave it in the street, but b'nei hakavod, because it's not considered honorable to leave the bed with the deceased. If the deceased is a woman, to leave that in the street, that's not considered proper respect. Rashi over here says, Ein manichin mita b'moed berchov lahaspido. Again, you don't leave the mita on the chol hamoed in the street, because again, you don't want to encourage eulogies. V'lo shel nashim liolam. You never leave the mita with women there at all. Sheshofo ziva, because blood, other liquids are going to flow from the body. Again, it's not going to be respectful for the woman. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Barishona hayu molichin beveis ha'evel ashirim bekilsa shel kesef v'shel zav v'aniyim besalin etzarim shel arava klufa. So originally they used to bring the food to the house of the wealthy mourners. They used to bring it in baskets of silver and gold. And for the poor, they would bring baskets of peeled willow branches. V'hayu aniyim misbaishim. And so the poor people were embarrassed by this. So iskinu shu akol meviin besalin etzarim shel arava klufa mimnei kavodan shel aniyim. So they instituted that everybody would have to use the baskets of peeled willow branches, and that was for the respect of the aniyim, for the respect of the poor. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, in the beginning they used to give to drink in the house of the mourners. Ashirim b'zechuches levana, the wealthy would have white glass, v'aniyim b'zechuches tzavua, and the aniyim, the poor, they would have colored glass. V'hayu aniyim misbaishin, and again the aniyim would be embarrassed. Hiskinu, so they instituted shayu akol mashkin b'zechuches tzavua, that everybody should use the colored glass, mimnei kavodan shel aniyim, out of respect for the aniyim. Barishona hayu megalin pnei ashirim u'mechasin pnei aniyim. Originally, when it came to the deceased, they used to uncover the face of the wealthy, and they used to cover the face of the poor, because the poor, their faces were blackened because of famine, so they would cover it up. And the aniyim, again, they were embarrassed. So they instituted that they would cover everyone's face, out of respect for the aniyim. Originally, they used to bring the ashirim out in the dargesh, but the aniyim, so again, the ashirim used to have like a special kind of bed or coffin. The aniyim did not have that. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis.